Hello, it's me again. And the next panel sounds a little bit like a Hollywood film, at least to me. Democratizing space, the next frontier. And let's give a warm welcome to Grant Blaisdell, the co-founder of CopernicSpace, Chris Jones, the director of NBV Limited, and Simon Drake, managing partner, co-founder, and partner, so like a man orchestra, at Space Ventures Investments. Enjoy the panel.
It's just it's kind of a joke because you see what the stand. Okay, we're on right now.
Cool.
Okay, so I want to welcome everybody to the Democratizing Space panel at Wolf Summit. Give a thanks to Wolf Summit for having us. My name's Grant Blaisdell. I'm a co-founder of CopernicSpace, and with me I have Simon Drake and Chris Jones. I'm going to take a few minutes to let these gentlemen introduce myself. I'll introduce myself a little bit more, and we'll get going on this discussion of, this next era of the space industry, or as we like to call it, economy, and its democratization. So Simon, if you want to go first, introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, hi. My name is Simon Drake. I'm the co-founder, managing director, and partner of Space Ventures Investors. We're a shareholder-driven company that builds out the strategic space value chain. So we're forward-looking and look to invest and do joint ventures in emerging space technology companies where we can evaluate from a due diligence point of view a realistic outcome in this exciting field.
And I'm Chris Jones. I am passionate about space. Have been ever since I was allowed to stay up and see the moon landing when I was 8. It kind of fired me up then. But I didn't come into the space industries until quite late in my career. Prior to that, I was dealing with automotive and aerospace, very large IT data sets, security systems, particularly cybersecurity as it's called now. But yeah, I've done a lot of work in and around the space technology arena, and I'm currently helping a number of universities in the UK and indeed the Shetland Space Centre with regards to getting ready for the UK launch of vertical rockets.
Thanks for that, guys. We're also supposed to have Marco Romero with us. Unfortunately, we had a little technical difficulties getting him on. Just as a quick background on Marco and why we had him here. Marco's really someone, in my opinion, that is actively, quote unquote, democratizing the space industry. So he's a founder and CEO of Humbitec. And for me, one of the really cool use cases they're doing that I wanted us to get into is using satellite data and imagery and packaging it in an actionable manner for farming companies, farmers, and governments in Ghana and across other similar jurisdictions that have a desperate need to access to that data. But as we're going to be discussing a little bit on this panel, that there's a big lack and therefore need for the world to be able to access these billions and billions of dollars worth of data, IP, and what we call digital assets. Quick thing around me, once again, I'm Grant Blaisdell, co-founder of CopernicSpace. I have a little family history around space. So my grandfather was, let's say, a space physics professor at the Polish Military Academy. My mother's active in the space industry. We have a Lady Rocket Foundation together, which focused on education and entrepreneurial experiences for mainly underprivileged youth using entertainment, music, technology, etc. But as CopernicSpace, we're a global digital marketplace focused on what we call digital space assets. We'll get into that a little bit. With also a layer on top of it that allows for companies or entities in the space industry to receive support from the greater public, whether that's financial, collaboratory, whatever it may be. So thanks once again, guys, for your intro. I guess, since the topic is really democratizing space, Simon, both of you actually would be really good at this. Let's first maybe define kind of how the space, really quickly, how the space industry looks today. And I want us to, at the end, focus a tiny bit on what we call this digital element, right? Everybody knows about Elon Musk shooting rockets up into space, but what I think is really not seen is, you know, the other side and the downstream element that exists in the industry. So if one of you wants to get started on that, please do.
Can I give a just quick cap on it? Good news is a lot of the early space industry was government-led, so now we can pat ourselves. If you're in a democratic country and your country has a space program, use your democratic ability to push your politicians to allocate more money to space commerce. That's number one thing we can do for space democratization. Number two is there exists a space industry which is pretty much dominated by the satellites, communication companies. Some of those companies, well, most of them actually shareholder companies. So if you're a shareholder, try and push, you know, in that direction as well. And then you have the, you know, the billionaires club, which doing great things for space commerce. I don't know if that's really, it is a function of having a democratic society, which enables them to pursue their vision in their own particular way. So I think we're at a good place. It's better than we were at maybe 20 years ago, and it's a good place to continue forward in order to evolve this space commerce with, you know, digitization and a more democratic element for smaller investors and downstream voters. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, Simon, I completely agree with you. Where are we now? Well, we are right at the start of the wave of the democratization of space. Space is no longer solely the preserve of governments or very large organizations. More and more, I'm seeing small and medium-sized companies that might at one point have been tier 2 or 3 or even tier 4 suppliers to the primes, actually making their own impact into the space economy. I think one of the things I am seeing a lot of, which is quite a good thing, is the proliferation of launch capability across the world. You know, with New Zealand, Australia, even in the UK. In the UK, we have got 6 launch facilities currently bidding to become the primary UK launch site. And it's likely to fall down to 2 different ones. One will be horizontally launched rockets, i.e. from a plane, launched from the wing, and the vertical launch of smaller satellites. And I think that is another important factor for the democratization of space. It is the fact that we're no longer necessarily talking about launching satellites the size of a small bus. We're talking about launching satellites that are as small as my thumb, you know, sats, which have got citizen science kind of opportunities behind them, with what is evolving into a global citizen ability to receive that information from space wherever you happen to be. So the way that the technology has been moving leads us down this whole opportunity for more and more ordinary people to be more involved with space, which I think can only be a good thing.
I'd like to add something to that real quick, which maybe to spin around this back for us. What does democratizing this economy mean for you guys? Maybe let's set kind of a definition of how we view that, because I think that could go many different ways in people's minds. I'll add, of course, my kind of viewpoint at the end of it if you guys want to start.
I'll just kick off with that. The democratization that I've seen from my own experience is, you know, we set up the website Space Ventures Investors over 10 years ago and get a lot of information from Google Forms and other data collection. And a lot of potential space investors, they want to invest in space resources. Mm-hmm. So And I look at this data very seriously because, you know, when you start to get, you know, not hundreds but thousands of queries and start to understand what potential investors want, and they want space resources and asteroid mining, that to me as a business decision meant that, you know, that's what the people want. So therefore I decided, well, how can we integrate that into our company? So it's really the market saying, you know, we want to go in this direction. So the good news is I turned that kind of demand into a spin-off startup that we created this year called the Lunar Resources Registry, in order to try and give some value to existing shareholders and potential shareholders in that space resources sector. But if you look at the allocation of money to space commerce in general, most of it goes for existing players. Not many of them are actually going to do anything with space resources. And you know, the only way to really change things and move technology forward is democratization, and through looking at, you know, what people want and also what they're allocating their capital in. I'm really interested, you know, hopefully in the near future, to launch more space investing related products with different flavors and different objectives, because I don't think we're at the stage yet where the average retail investor can play that big a part. But I'm sure with you know, more digitization of financial assets, where that intersects with space technology, then you can have really interesting projects come about. We're still at the ground laying stage, but it is happening slowly but surely. And as we all know, things happen very slowly and then bang, they take off.
Yeah, we will reach a tipping point. I mean, please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that we're there yet. We're not. We're a long way from there yet. With regards to the money that goes into the space sector, 90-something% of all the money still goes to the primes. You know, very little of it really goes to the smaller organizations. Even when you look at the bid that NASA launched at the beginning of last month, for a commercial organization to mine regolith from the moon's surface and return it. And they're looking at effectively awarding a contract for a company to mine between 50 grams and 150 grams of moon soil and return it back to Earth. Even with that competition, we're not going to see the smaller players being able to really take advantage of it. But it is a step towards that democratization of space. It is a step towards the open commercialization of space. Obviously, there's a long way to go. The more that we do this, the more we're likely to see congestion in space debris becoming more and more of a problem. All of these things still need to be addressed, but there will come a tipping point where it becomes more of a commercialized operation than a government-led operation. And we are starting to see that in the downstream economy for space data. We're starting to see that people don't even realize that they're using space technology, space data in their day-to-day lives. You know, Google Maps, your GPS, the sat nav in the car, you know, all these other stuff that's around there, the farmers that are using this to improve the quality of crops and disease control, and you know, all of that stuff is the steps that we're taking towards the open utilization and democratization of space assets. But all of that is downstream rather than upstream. Upstream, you're talking about the mining, and we are at least a decade away from getting anything like space mining up and running.
Yeah, you said a few very important things to that. I'm actually, although Marco couldn't join us, I'm chatting with him back and forth while we're doing this, and he's bringing in some interesting insights, which I'd like to give first before I kind of give my side of the thing. So as I mentioned earlier, I view Marco as one of these people who's actively doing this democratization of the industry. He says that Africa overall has around 37 space startups. He says over half of them are funded or boosted by the government. He's saying that the only thing that is open and democratized is all downstream, mainly data usage focused elements, right? And back to what he was doing, that's what he's providing, is providing these downstream elements packaged in a way for entities that really didn't have access or usage to them before, can now do that and take advantage, once again, Chris, like you said, of data, imagery, technologies that were generally kind of held within a tight-knit aspect of the space industry or some elements of the tech industry itself, and is very hard to democratize in that sense. So he's saying that for Africa, downstream is the entire entrance, because he says 40% of SDG data in Africa, there's a gap of like 500 billion or 1.2 trillion a year. Either way, this, both of you know a little bit, about CopernicSpace and our project around that. And, all these cases that we're talking about, and especially what Chris said, because mining, all those aspects are going to be vital, important parts of the industry. And they also need to have kind of foundational new systems built to be able to manage those. What they're going to be is digital assets at the end of the day, whether that's tokenized or using blockchain technology. But with Copernic, one of our big focuses was providing exactly that, taking these companies that are either generating this data directly or are restructuring this data in an actionable way and providing them a secure, scalable, fully auditable marketplace that not only allows them to attract and attain new users, but also sustain these unique security factors that are very necessary in the space industry and economy. So if we were to create, and NASA's a great example of this, Simon, when you were talking, I thought of this. NASA has billions of dollars in intellectual property and technological access that they're almost trying to give away. But once again, the processes and the funnels that are set up for it, most people don't know this, first off. Second off, the access funnels are extremely traditional, not scalable, not open, et cetera. So just as we've seen with digital media or the music industry, and weirdly enough, they seem very far apart, but at its core, they have very similar things. When I was talking about security, tracking IP, monetization of it, et cetera, that what you see in the music industry and other industries, they've created these global, almost e-commerce-y marketplaces for their digital assets, right? And the space industry with downstream elements especially have the same capability, to where entrepreneurs in Ghana, for example, where Marco is, can easily access that and convert it into something that can improve the lives of people locally or all over the world.
I mean, there has been...
He's Angola, not Ghana. My apologies.
Okay. What I was going to say was that for a very long time, decades, the guys that were doing Earth observation stuff, Earth observation data, really, really struggled to get that information out into the public domain. And it's very slowly over time, we were starting to look at building applications on that data, which was not open source. All of this stuff cost thousands of pounds per image. And funnily enough, was actually delivered by courier, a motorcycle courier, to your desktop with a floppy disk when I started looking at it. But now it is far more freely available. And I mean that, freely available. But it is still incredibly difficult to actually use, understand, manipulate. And that's where we need the effort, is how do we make those data sets freely available, but also, or at least, I say freely available at a relatively affordable rate, because they're not all freely available, but also understandable and usable. Some of this was done in the agricultural industry, and a lot more needs to be done in that. But funnily enough, one of the things that has started to wake people up to the potential applications of these Earth observation assets is the stuff that's been done with the archaeology and using the sort of satellite radar imaging or ground penetrating radar kind of imaging to identify archaeological assets that have never been seen before. And that has really raised an awful lot of interest globally about what we can potentially do with these image sets, particularly if you start to look at the same image over 10, 15, 20 years and be able to see what differences there are or what images pop up out of the ground at you when you do those sort of studies.
Simon, you have anything to add?
Yeah, it's interesting. The conversation is steered to Earth observation. I think Earth observation. I've been working in the part of the Copernicus program from the European Commission, which is really getting the Earth observation data from the Copernicus, program, Sentinel satellites down to end users and find end markets. And it really comes down to educating, in this case, the agricultural sector about what data products are available. And then that draws in more demand, because then, for example, farmers might say, well, if the price of data to interpret, information is getting cheaper by the year, and the access of personnel to do that is getting cheaper by the year, it means, they want more demand in that data. And I really think we live in the decade of the Earth observation data explosion. And it's actually a really interesting period to be alive in, to see this kind of whole, terabytes every day of Earth observation data. And there are people that, know how to download it and interpret it for you. I'm not one of them. I just review their business models. Maybe I should learn how to do it properly. But yeah, Earth observation is one of the great wonders of the recent decade, and how it is so easily in the hands of the consumer, and it's so much more richer than what you see on Google Maps and things like that. We're getting into very granular focus on individual pieces of land, and LiDAR is great for looking at oil terminals and how full they are, and architectural areas. It's a great example of the democratization of space using downstream space technology, which was only available because governments said we want to go in that direction to fund these kind of projects. So it's almost we have a cycle where we have a democratic country saying, all right, we want to build these systems up. And then the free market says, all right, well, I'm going to find out where to use this data. And, in 10, 20 years, hopefully this conversation is at another level where it's the shareholder-driven companies or companies driven by an STO token or something can actually bring something of value in space mining or something. I think we can take these models and extrapolate them from data to the next thing, which is, extracting resources from the next planet.
I think. Oh, sorry. You mind if I go quick?
Carry on, Grant. Yeah.
Around that. Quick comment from Marco relates to what you're talking about a bit. It says. It says for them to be affordable or free, we will come back to government structures, cooperations, or pretty much tax holders paying for this. But I think that's really sort of what, like with CopernicSpace, we're sort of trying to attract, which, correct me if I'm wrong, guys. My view is that, of course, one aspect of this data still being expensive in some sort of sense is the cost to acquire it or create the satellites, et cetera, is astronomical. But I think really the main part that's being missed is the fact that they're still not actually scaling up their business model with it. Therefore, each client or each transaction they do accomplish around that data, they feel they have to justify, their operations with a big price tag. But if you were able to deliver that user base in a bigger scale, in a digital format, where these transactions and processes don't take weeks, from my understanding with a lot of them, and all the paperwork associated, that then you can provide them, let's say, the economic incentive, the marketplace, to allow them to really cut down those costs. And once again, democratize. Just like, we were talking about what was the cost of cell phones, the first computers. I mean, when I was one, or two, and I first saw three maybe, and I first saw or used a computer, they were extremely expensive. You were in the elite of the world by having that. Internet penetration 20 years ago was 0.5% of the world, right? And all these technologies became much more efficient. So I'm wondering whether it's just a cost thing, or how I see it, a big portion of it is there's no scalable marketplace for them to cut down their price tag.
I think to some extent you're right. I mean, let's not forget that we as citizens of our countries have already paid for this stuff. Yes, it's bloody expensive, but we've paid for it in the taxes and all the rest of it, because we've invested in it as military assets. And that is where all the information has originally come from. That is widened out into much more scientific research and so on and so forth. But we're still paying for it as taxpayers of the various countries. The question is really, how do we claw some of that back, having already paid for it, by making use of what is now a massive store of data? And the answer to that is that it does have to become easier to use for the average citizen. Your average citizen needs to be aware that it's available to them and be able to access it literally with 2 or 3 clicks of the mouse. And once we get to that, then you'll see an explosion of the use cases, the businesses that are built on the back of it, the income that's generated from it, and some of that expense that we've already plowed into this critical infrastructure, because that's what it is, critical infrastructure. As citizens, we will start to actually see, as citizens, getting some of that money back, and certainly getting some of the benefits back from that expenditure. And in that respect, that is the slow form of the democratization of what is an existing space asset.
Simon, you have something quickly to add, because I want to get into something. We have about 10 minutes or so. Before we get to the end, I wanted to get into, when we're talking about financing. But if you have anything to add to what Chris said, please do.
Yeah, following on from what Chris's comments, for a government or a civilization, getting your money back from investment in expensive assets, in this case, Earth observation satellites, and making the public and the consumer from a B2C, B2B point of view aware of it. I actually think it's in the hands of the young, of the youth, to embrace this technology and really put it out there, get into it, discard all your social media blah blah stuff, and go straight into the hard science apps, which are putting this Earth observation data in your hands, because you really get a glimpse into the world which the previous generation didn't have. And just as a funny remark, Grant, it's great that you said that only 20 years ago, only 0.5% of the population had internet. I was part of that, So for anyone who's relatively younger than I am, get into the small percentage of people who really understand Earth observation data, because it's such a great thing to move on to. And then you can move from that into not Earth observation data, but lunar observation data.
Yep.
Martian observation data.
Yep.
And then you start going out into the solar system, not based on dreams and hopes and concepts, but actually understanding from a geological point of view, what are these planets are made of? And I do it because I look at it from a space resources point of view. At the moment, I spend a lot of time looking at resources data on the lunar surface, saying, where can you actually find things of value? Whether it's for space in situ resources, or commodities or propulsion, whatever. The data's out there. All you have to do is find out how to get it and interpret it, and build a team. That's number one. But yeah, back to you, Grant.
Yeah, and the last time you spoke, Simon, you mentioned STOs, and Marco chimed in through a chat right away with me and said, you got excited, tokenization, shareholders can be an option, which leads into something, Simon, you and I, when we first spoke, is something we heavily focused on. Chris, I've spoken about about this as well. And like I said earlier, this is the second layer part of the CopernicSpace platform, where companies who want to commercialize their digital assets can also place themselves or their projects as to be supported. The only reason I didn't go and start saying investment or start getting into that whole aspect is because the security token offering regulatory space is maturing and is not yet 100% at the capability to offer it the way that we want to, right? Which gets into what I mentioned a little bit in the beginning. Simon, Chris, if you could quickly add on to this, is there's loads of great space startups. This industry is democratizing or privatizing in that sense, but there's a very big kind of drop off and lack of access to financing, good investors for these projects. You have your big ones with $100 million ticket with a few VCs that go into. You got some angels who are really passionate, but generally from seed stage to mature stage, it's really, really hard. And just like you brought up with the internet, 0.5 penetration, internet penetration. Bitcoin, for example, is at 0.5% penetration right now globally. And the point behind that is that taking these new technologies, and CopernicSpace, for example, is a tokenized smart contract ecosystem. So all these digital assets are tokenized. But using these new technologies to really open up the financing world, as the ICO sort of era showed in the crypto space, is possible technically.
I'll try and compress this into 2 minutes, 3 minutes. The current state of affairs, as I see it, is I look at one of our companies is registered in the UK, and the UK has company law going back hundreds of years, and you can sell shares in a company and it works. Security tokens are required to take us to the next level. We're still waiting for the regulatory speed bumps to be evened out, so to say. But I still think that there will always be regulatory problems, always with raising money, and it's the biggest headache imaginable. But I also think there's some utility in utility tokens, because they're not a security. Once you have a security, there's different legal frameworks to abide by. The utility and mixing it with space is actually quite interesting, because the utility aspect, there has to be a use to it. But it's, as more entrepreneurs and investors and developers start to mix and work out exactly what that utility is for, then you can start getting some very sexy, applications of that. And using a utility token to raise capital is, the best way to do it. So I think it's all, blue sky in that area. Also with security tokens, regulation, we're not there yet, but that might change. It might change next year. Who knows? Anyone working on it, keep at it.
Yeah, I actually, because of my experience in the regulatory space with crypto and the anti-money laundering aspect, I kind of preview towards the end of next year the STO space will be open, especially in the UK potentially. But either way, and it's cool that you brought in the utility model, because I didn't want to go, too deep down the rabbit hole in these different sort of tokenization models. But I'm glad you brought that up. Chris, any last words before I do a quick conclusion? Because we got 5 more minutes, so.
Yeah, I am one of those angel investors who is passionate about space. There are very few of us, and there needs to be more of us, particularly for the early stage, seed stage growth kind of businesses that are prior to the VCs. With regards to VCs, I only know of about 5 VC companies that specialize in funding for space startups and space companies. And even those, really, they're not interested in the really early stage stuff. They, as per usual with VCs, they want, quite rightly, companies that are already making money. And that's a big ask for a small space space technology company. I mean, they do say, if you want to be a millionaire in space, start as a billionaire. So that's probably no longer quite true, but I think it's got a lot of truth behind it.
Start with 2 billion.
Yeah, indeed. With regards to the tokenization and so on and so forth, interestingly, okay, first off, it's not about the technology, it's about the user case. The technology that sits behind it, most users won't care, so long as it works. For those of us who are technologists, of course it matters. You know, it is absolutely crucial that the damn stuff works and we know what we're working with. But as we move towards a multi-planetary civilization, because that's where we're headed, as we move towards that situation and we start to see interplanetary commerce, particularly between Earth and Mars, Earth and the Moon not so much so, but between Earth and Mars, the only way that that will be able to work effectively is by embedding it into something like blockchain in order to maintain a accurate understanding of that commercial transaction, given the latency that is inherent in communication between Earth and Mars. Again, we're a long way down the line there, and that's definitely down the rabbit hole. But you know, if we're looking at having a Mars base by 2030, then it's not unreasonable to suggest that we might be looking at interplanetary commerce by 2035, 2040. And that's really not that far down the line.
Okay, thanks for that. We're around 2 minutes towards the end. Everyone, I think a cool thing would give a recent use case or kind of your dream case as you see in this democratization place. I can give you mine real quick as an example. So if anybody knows, NASA relies on Congress approval for all of its funding. As I said, they have billions and billions of dollars of IP technologies that they want to give to the world. I even asked the head of NASA about it, Jim Branstein. So my dream long-term for CopernicSpace is to onboard all NASA IP and technologies, allow them to be easily accessible and commercialized to the public, and also allow NASA to get out of the hands of an incompetent Congress when it comes to funding for space, and allow them to have a secure and scalable model to allow the American public to fund any budget shortfalls that they have independently and in a democratic manner. So you guys ended on that note. And last thing, Marco, I'll add Marco's little point. He says, you know, he's focused on the African market, which I think is huge and I believe in a lot of ways. One reason I got into blockchain tech. He says it's behind in terms of digital penetration. So that's the challenge for this era for them, which is mainly infrastructure based. But he said that the engagement of decision makers and their buying power on the market actually is an advantage there, as they can move weight really quickly. So you guys ended on your dream case.
My dream case really quickly is the investors heard a lot more because they're the ones bringing money to the table and turning concepts into reality. And any vehicle that helps investors along, I'm great with that. Chris?
I'm going to be really boring. For me, the thing that I think is going to help the most is having clear international standards around a lot of this stuff, particularly how we as citizens engage with space. Because without those clear international standards in place, you're just going to keep on hitting brick walls and we will be delayed. And the last thing I want to see is us being delayed in this democratization. It's so important. And yes, I know that's boring.
That was good.
My bad. I forgot the mute thing. I want to thank you guys for coming. I want to thank Marco for, even though we had the technical difficulties, to commenting for me and providing some insights. Simon, Chris, thank you once again, and thank you to Wolf Summit and the public. If anyone has interest in any of what the four of us are doing on here, please reach out, and we look forward to democratizing the space industry with you.
Cool. Thank you.
Guys.
Thank you very much indeed.